Today's case is from the Philippines. Besides its breathtaking islands, the Philippines is also known for its people's hospitality and strong family ties. These values are rooted in the country's Christian faith, with almost 90% of the population being Roman Catholic. This has led to the formation of strong communities and a culture of caring and respect for one another. It is rare to see a household without grandparents or extended family members in the Philippines. Parents expect their children to take care of them until old age, daughters especially. But what happens if this cultural trait is pushed to the extreme? What if a parent never wants their child to leave home? Today we will talk about the Cabading family carnage, which is one of the worst real-life crimes that shocked the nation in the 1960s. The psychological and social relevance of this case has not diminished after 6 decades. It is a dark tale of true love, heartbreak, and jealousy. Let's begin with our case, the Cabading family murders, otherwise known as the house on Zapote Street. In the evening of January 18, 1961, 4 shots were heard at 1074 Zapote Street, Makati. The house belonged to the Cabading family. Upon entering the room where the shots came from, the police could hear an anguished voice crying out for them to push the door. They turned the lights on and saw that the entire room was spattered with blood. Mrs. Asuncion Cabading's body was apparently blocking the door. From what they could see, she was shot in the chest and stomach, but was still breathing. Based on the Manila Chronicle story that subsequently shocked the whole nation, she sustained 8 wounds and was on the brink of death at this point. She was strewn across her daughter, Lydia Cabading, who was laid on top of her dead husband's body, Dr. Leonardo Quitangon. As it turned out, Pablo Cabading, the family patriarch, was responsible for their deaths. He was also found dead at the bloody murder scene, appearing to have committed suicide shortly after the shooting. Mrs. Cabading would later recount the incident. Pablo Cabading shot Lydia while she shielded her husband. Mrs. Cabading was shot when she tried to shield her daughter. What would cause such a tragedy to take place? What would push a father to murder his own family? In 1960, Dr. Leonardo Quitangon, a 35-year-old doctor and professor, met Lydia Cabading, who was 23 years old and a medical intern. They began to date. They watched movies, basketball games, and he took her home to meet his family in Santa Mesa, Manila, a couple of times. Lydia was a timid and sweet girl, but there was something strange about her. She rarely spoke about her home life or childhood. No fond memories were ever shared. She was on alert whenever she had to stay out late. In a panic, she would often say, "I'll have to let my father know first," and would rush home. Her boyfriend's family would recount that, of course, they understood the culture. Lydia was the only child, so she had to be protected at all times. But the Quitangon brothers often wondered about the extreme strictness of Pablo Cabading, Lydia's father, who was a retired cop. He would take her to school and fetch her immediately after classes. He would threaten to arrest young men who stared at Lydia. He possessed an overbearing, authoritarian attitude typical of a Manila police officer. Because Lydia was about to take the board exam, Leonardo, being a professor, wanted to help her study. He frequented the house, and her family seemed to like him just fine. Lydia's mother, Asuncion, 45, was the very definition of submission. She spoke only when allowed by her husband. He acted as if his word was the law. When Lydia passed the board exam, the couple asked Pablo for permission to get married. In exchange for Pablo's permission, the couple were required to live at the house on Zapote Street with Pablo. Having no choice but to obey the patriarch, Leonardo did as he was told. Soon after, Leonardo understood why Lydia was withdrawn and mysterious about her home life. There was something creepy about Pablo's obsession with his daughter. When the couple was dating, Pablo would often join the two. He would often complain when he was seated at the back of the car and would want to join the couple up front. The couple was forbidden from chatting in their bedroom when Leonardo came home from work. They were expected to stay in the living room where Pablo could keep an eye on them. Even during their honeymoon, Pablo demanded Lydia spend the night in her mother's room instead of with her husband because her mother allegedly had a toothache. Numerous other reasons besides the toothache were given following these demands for separate nightly arrangements. Leonardo became increasingly agitated. During this time, Pablo's behavior grew more erratic and violent. Leonardo became more determined to remove his wife from such a toxic environment as the day passed. Pablo's response to this was, "If she goes with you, I'll shoot her in the head before your eyes." This prompted his brothers to persuade him to buy a gun of his own, but Leonardo insisted on carrying his rosary instead. Pablo continued his tyranny. During Lydia's oath-taking as a physician, he forbade Leonardo to attend the ceremony. The reason was that Pablo paid everything for Lydia's schooling while he paid none, so Leonardo shouldn't be part of the glory. Pablo was shutting him down for no reason. As the months passed and the situation worsened, Leonardo decided to move out. He couldn't take Lydia with him because she was too scared to leave. He couldn't get in touch with her for weeks afterwards, since no contact was possible outside the house. Lydia was only allowed outside the house if accompanied by family members. This only changed when she was employed in a hospital. He quickly went to visit her only to meet Pablo. Leonardo found out the next day that she was no longer working there. He soon discovered that Lydia was pregnant and tried to cover all her prenatal expenses, but the payments were returned. One day, Leonardo received a frantic phone call from his wife, pleading with him to take her. He immediately got her out of the house and drove to his family house in Cavite. As he traveled, he warned his brothers in Santa Mesa to keep their mother safe. A few hours later, a taxi arrived at Gitangon's residence in Santa Mesa. Lydia's parents emerged from the vehicle and shouted at the Gitangon's gate, demanding her daughter be returned. The younger brothers of Leonardo, Jean and Nonilo, tried to calm them down and talk things out. They said Lydia wasn't with them, she was with her husband. At that moment, Pablo returned to the taxi, grabbed his submachine gun from a box, and pointed it at Jean. He threatened to shoot everyone if they didn't produce his daughter right away. With a gun to his face, Jean tried to pacify Pablo and invited him inside the house because they were causing a scene outside. Ever conscious of his public image, Pablo lowered his gun. He gave the family until midnight to return his daughter. Otherwise, the family should have the place guarded by the police. Jean then went to the couple in Cavite. Jean relayed to them what happened in Santa Mesa, the machine gun to his face, and the ultimatum. Shaken and desperate by the situation, Lydia sank to a low point in her heart. Lydia had had enough. In a burst of emotion, she confessed that she had never been truly happy. She finally told them about Pablo's temper. It would only take a snap of the fingers for the smiles, fondness, and caresses to change into physical abuse. Against everyone's warning, they decided to go back to the Zapote house. In a panic, Leonardo's father offered to go to the house with his sons and try to reason with Pablo. When he did, however, Leonardo's father was pleasantly surprised to find Pablo in good spirits. He was full of smiles and happy greetings. He even said he didn't object to Lydia moving out. The Gitangons were overjoyed by this great news. It all seemed to go well until the next morning. The next morning, Pablo called up the Santa Mesa house and said that Mrs. Cabating had fallen ill and asked her daughter to come over. Jean and Nonilo accompanied Lydia to help move her things from the Zapote house to the couple's new apartment. But when they arrived, it was pretty clear to them that Mrs. Cabating faked her sickness and pretended to be asleep on the sofa. Jean even smiled at this childishness of the situation. But Lydia knew better, and she immediately began packing her things. Mrs. Cabating, who was supposedly ill, ran after her. Pablo then told the brothers that he wanted the couple to stay in Zapote after all. He said he built the house for Lydia, and if she wants it, everybody will move out for her. When Jean came back home without her and told Leonardo what had happened, Leonardo tried to go back to the Zapote house to get her. Jean, worried, told him not to go alone. Don't force Lydia to come with you. If she doesn't want to, leave at once. Do not be persuaded to stay there too. This was the last conversation the brothers had. Soon after, Nonilo called Jean, distress clear in his voice, saying he heard 4 shots from Lydia's room. Jean immediately sent his younger brother to inform the family lawyer and alert the Makati police. And that was how the police found the slain family. According to Leonardo's brother's testimony, when he and Leonardo arrived, Pablo allowed Leonardo up to Lydia's room. Mrs. Cabating soon followed up to Lydia's room with a glass of milk. He soon heard a scream and someone sobbing. Pablo went upstairs and entered the room and closed the door. What followed were 3 shots. Based on the description, it's possible that the killer had feelings of jealousy or rage and acted impulsively in a moment of intense emotion. It's also possible that Pablo had planned the attack in advance. In either case, the result was a heartbreaking tragedy. This case is one of the most well-known real-life horror stories in the country because it touched upon the core values of Filipinos: respect for authority, family ties, and strong Catholic faith. What would have happened if Leonardo armed himself with a gun instead of a rosary? Would they still be alive if they didn't just resign their fate to prayers that one evening? The story was immortalized in art, a book made popular, and its subsequent film adaptation that made it to the Cannes Film Festival. The book adaptation of the story became popular when the Philippines was under martial law, and the subject of an authoritarian figure like Pablo Cabating was definitely a controversial topic because of the political climate at the time. The movie adaptation of this story, which debuted in 1981, is still regarded as one of the best films in the country to date. The film was revolutionary because it featured incest on screen for the first time. It was revealed that the film director insinuated sexual relations between the father and the daughter, causing Pablo to go insane with jealousy. This was supported by the book author when he disclosed a disturbing detail about the story. Pablo, unbeknownst to the young couple, sometimes hid under their bed as they slept. Speculations were rife that something strange might have been going on in the household that the family wanted to keep quiet about. Was Pablo's intense jealousy because of the thought that Lydia was his possession, his secret lover? Was Pablo the father of the child Lydia was carrying? In fact, Mrs. Cabating filed a temporary restraining order to prevent the film from being shown to the public in a desperate attempt to protect the privacy of her family. The true details of their relationship remain shrouded in mystery, only known between the two of them. On 1074 Zapote Street, the pretty little house Pablo Cabating built for his Lydia is the only witness to what really happened. That's all for today. Thanks for watching.